All right. It is 3 o'clock. I'm going to give folks another minute or so. It's Friday, and yeah, so it's Friday, and I'm here, and glad that you could be here too. If you want to say hi in the comments, awesome, and we'll get started in a minute or so. All right, so I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. So yeah, so it's Friday, so happy Friday. Made it through another week, and today I'm going to kind of pick up where I left off yesterday. I'm going to work with some imagery. I'm going to start off. I'm thinking doing starting off with some collage, and then I'm going to do some drawing. I talked about maybe getting into drawing yesterday, but I didn't quite get to that because of doing the image transfer. So basically just kind of spending some time adding some images in a couple different ways, and using some simple ways to add some meaning and start to like really kind of build that up as well. So anyway, if like I've said, if you're tuning in and you want to say hi in the comments, it's always great to see who is out there. And also, if you have any questions or comments or things like that, feel free to pop them in there as well. Yeah, so going to start off with a little bit of collage and then kind of move into some drawing. So let me go ahead and flip this around. Of course, I've got my journal. I'm going to be drawing, so I've grabbed my Faber-Castell Pitt Artist Pens. I've grabbed the black, and I like this little pack because it comes with 4 different sizes: an extra small, small, fine, and kind of a medium point. So I'll probably most likely today use the fine. I like that it's a fairly thick tip, but not super thick. The M is a little bit thicker, but so it's kind of it says a fine tip. It's just one of the ones that I really like. And I've got my glue stick, and I've got that brain again. So yesterday I was talking about how I was thinking about using this as an image transfer, but I had already cut it out and had the shape of it cut out, and it would work, but then I'd have to deal with all that sticky tape. So after I got off the live stream yesterday, I was kind of cleaning up, and I picked up the brain. I'm like, I could still use this, but instead of using it as an image transfer, I could just collage it in. And so that's kind of what I want to do today. So as always, I kind of just like flipping through, and this just gives me, just kind of refreshes my mind. I can kind of review what I've been doing, and basically I'm looking for a spot. Now this is like about the size of of a uh, a page, and so I was thinking, I'm like, well, I could put it like in the center, and it really kind of takes up space. Or I was thinking maybe it can be wrapped around the edge. I kind of like the idea of wrapping it around the edge. So probably won't do that anywhere up front because I just have a lot going on. And if I collage it in, it's going to cover up a lot that I don't really want to cover up. So I think kind of flipping back here, going back to where there are things started but not really developed yet. And so I kind of, these pages got a little bit of color, not much else. So I think this would be a perfect place. And the nice thing about gluing this in now is that it will give me an opportunity to build on top of it. And this is just printer paper. It's just a photocopy. So I can paint on it. I can draw on it. I can kind of build stuff up. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead, and I want this to wrap around. So that way, like half the brain, well, actually, I hadn't really thought before about putting it in the center. I feel like it just sort of takes up a lot of space. And if I was going to do that, maybe that was something I would do after I build up a little bit more on this, but I think on the side. The nice thing is I can always print out another one and use it, especially maybe later in the book. So But anyway, I want to go ahead and fold this just so I kind of have an idea of where I want it to fold and wrap around, and just sort of made sure that the fold kind of lined up right there with those little notches. And then that way it can kind of go right around. So whenever somebody says they have half a brain, I guess there's the other half. Sorry, just kind of silly. But anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and glue that in. That's kind of how I'm going to start off today. And then, as always, I've got my glue paper down and spreading that glue, covering the entire back. You know, some people really like to use like acrylic medium and like Mod Podge for gluing, but that's great on like if I'm doing acrylic based stuff. But since I use a lot of watercolor and watercolor pencil, I don't want to have any kind of plasticky kind of medium or whatever kind of, because, you know, I paint it on, it's going to ooze out. And so if this was acrylic medium, sometimes, you know, you paint over it to kind of seal it in. I wouldn't be able to use watercolor on top of it. But, you know, once this dries, I can draw on it, I can paint on it, I can write on it. There's all kinds of things that I can do. Just another reason why I just use glue stick. In artwork that I'm using a lot of acrylic, then yeah, I'll use acrylic medium and things like that. So anyway, just kind of rub that in. And so just the addition of these kind of images helps to start to kind of create meaning and messages, even though that might not be very clear. So even though this is all about emergence, I still haven't really kind of gotten into a lot of that. I'm thinking probably next week, being the third week. Wow, third week already. So this is the end of the second week already doing this. So this is 2 weeks worth of work. So now what I'm thinking about is I'm thinking about drawing. I've done a little bit of drawing as far as just lines, but that's pretty basic. But what I want to do now is I want to think about images or things that are going to help convey some meaning or some messages. And I just kind of think about the things that I typically draw. I know in this book, I'm really trying to push myself and kind of push myself out of my comfort zone, push myself out of what I normally do. But here lately, I haven't really done a lot of drawing and using images. So kind of going back to some of that might be kind of interesting. So I love faces. I've drawn a lot of faces in my journals throughout the years. And so faces are always interesting to me. I've done monsters, and that's one of the things I do for my art, but I don't think monsters would be quite appropriate in here. Some people like to draw flowers and animals and things like that. So I'm definitely thinking a face. That's probably one of the first things that I'll do. I was thinking something here. Another thing I've gotten into over the last year or so is sort of a more organic thing. I'm thinking like a leaf-like shape, just to kind of, the leaf-like shape is kind of geometric, at least the one I use. It's kind of like a football shape, but you put a bunch of them together. So I'm thinking one here just to kind of do that. So, you know, just kind of that idea of an arc and then another arc. just kind of like a big eyeball kind of. But if I take these and make different sizes, I'm not really trying to like draw any kind of plant or any particular kind of leaf. It's just sort of more that notion of a leaf-like shape. I'm not drawing a stem. Sometimes it's that notion of sort of like leaves falling. So I'm just kind of filling up the space. So, I mean, you really could draw anything. I mean, you could just do simple shapes. I do a lot of squares and rectangles and circles. Might as well have some that go off the edge. So this pen that I'm using, this fine point pen, again, this is a Faber-Castell Pitt Artist pen. It's India ink. It is waterproof, pretty permanent, and it's one of my favorite pens. I've been using it a lot. I used to use the Uniball Vision pens a lot, and I still have them, and I still use them. But the problem is with the Vision pens, when I was traveling a lot before the pandemic, they would often sort of have issues on flights. They did not handle the change in pressure very well. So these pens definitely do handle that better. So I just kind of like, there's sort of this motion. I'm thinking maybe have a few more down here. Maybe one comes over here. So it draws pretty well on top of the magazine, even though you might not be able to see it right now. Later on, I might think about how to I might think about like thickening the lines of this, or I might fill in the leaf-like shapes. I might fill in around it, but right now I'm just going to leave that. That's kind of interesting. Actually, I just thought like, oh, that ends there. What if it comes over here? Let me mark. Okay. And then I can kind of wrap that little leaf-like shape. Okay. And got a question in the comments about the pages. So I use paints and water-soluble pencils. If you want to see how I did all the color and the texture and stuff, you can go back and watch watch some of the videos in this series. So every day I've been live streaming and just working in this journal. So especially the first day, I started building up a lot of the layers. So you can kind of go and see that, but it's the watercolor paint, or actually I use Derwent Inktense paints, not quite watercolor, but work just like watercolor. It's actually water-soluble ink. And then I use Inktense water-soluble pencils. But like I said, it's all here on Facebook, or you can also catch it over on YouTube. So anyway, so what I'm doing is kind of thinking like maybe like I did here, I'm thinking maybe do the same thing right here. So again, this is a way to sort of wrap the composition, wrap the page around, and it helps tie things together. So it visually kind of carries things through and carries things over. Just a very different way of thinking about a journal, a visual journal, an art journal. Okay. So I probably, later on I might go through and draw some shapes and lines and such, but really thinking about recognizable images and doing faces and things like that. And so I'm not going to draw on every single one. Actually, I like this profile, but I have an idea for another one, but I want to flip back. And what I'm thinking of is back here. Actually, might as well go ahead. I'm going to flip. So skip a couple pages. I'm getting to the point where I'm kind of working past this halfway point. And so, the back half is still blank, but I can always go in with ink. So with that other profile, so when I drew it here, and it was facing that way. This time I'm going to draw a profile looking back this way. So the nose is going to be over here somewhere. And I think I'm just going to draw it with pen. Of course, if you're like, oh, well, I don't want to draw with pen, I might mess it up. Pencil's always a good idea. And if you wanted to, you could actually look at a profile of someone. So even though I use color like the watercolor and the water-soluble pencil a lot to start pages, sometimes I just start with a pen. And so now this profile is looking back, kind of looking back through the pages, and then this one has multiple, but the original one was looking that way, and then I cut it and traced it. So maybe this gets cut later, that I'm not 100% certain of. Okay. But there is another kind of face I want to work on and use. I'm just thinking maybe here on the map. So I used to really be into drawing very realistic faces, and that was the thing. Like in high school, I'd love to draw faces throughout college and such, but I don't really have the patience to sit down and do really realistic faces. So I like to do stylized faces now. And so a few years ago, I kind of developed a stylized face. So stylized, just simply I'm simplifying and abstracting the face, and it ended up being sort of more of a mask-like face. So that's kind of what I'm gonna think about. So thinking about, like, this is the eye, kind of the eyebrow. Um, think about the nose. So the face is going to go off. If I wanted to, that can kind of continue it over there. We'll see if I want to do that. Actually, I just kind of realized I drew this differently than I normally do. It's been a while since I've kind of done these faces, so there's really no wrong way or right way of doing it, but just kind of interesting to think like, oh yeah, I haven't done it in a while, and that's not how I normally do it. But that's the nice thing, is that things can change and evolve. Now these faces just sort of came about because I was playing around with shape and just kind of like, oh, how can I show a face and break it down into some basic shapes? And I was just experimenting and playing around with it. Next thing I know, it's like, oh, it's kind of like a mask. I'm just debating if I want to try to continue it on this side. Part of me is like, yeah, it might be kind of cool. Then, but part of me is like, yeah, but it might be hard to kind of line things up. So maybe I'll just not do that right now. So I'm just kind of sketching this in right now. It doesn't have to be completed and highly polished, and just just that it's there right now. Because what I can do then is I'll come back later. I always, as I sort of am working on and feeling like pages are resolved and finished, I can come back and embellish and kind of work things out. But like something like this, I mean, you can see the face. It really starts to kind of blend in. So when I come back later, I'll thicken the lines. But I want to make the face stand out from sort of the rest of the page. So just automatically, I was like, oh well, if I darken, I could take paint, or in this case, I think I'll take my Inktense pencils, and I used over here, I think it was the fuchsia. I'll take out my fuchsia Inktense pencil, and yeah, in the comments says like the third eye. Yeah, it's kind of like that is the idea. I usually think of this as a meditating face, and sort of part of it was with that third eye, as you call it, was just sort of like it's an empty forehead, and it was like I need something in the forehead, and it just kind of made sense. So I'm going to do like I did around the squares over here, and just shade in. Actually, while I'm at it, since I used that security envelope and sort of covered up that square, why don't we bring it back? So this ink is actually had quite a bit of time to dry. Sorry if you're hearing a very high pitch beeping. That must be the smoke detector in the kitchen. My wife must be making something that either boiled over or something in the toaster oven. So anyway, I totally lost my train of thought now. Oh, the ink. So yeah, it takes the ink a little bit to dry. So if you really leave it sit, it's definitely going to be super, super dry. It should be fine. I do find that like with these Pitt pens, the Pitt artist pens, that they are pretty permanent. They can fade a little bit as you paint over them, but they're pretty good. There have been some pens that I've used that have said that they were waterproof and fade proof, and you paint over them and they bleed. That's one of the reasons why I like the Uniball Vision pens, because, well, you have to get the ones that do say waterproof vision or waterproof and fade proof. And they are pretty waterproof, pretty fade proof. But again, it's almost like any material. If you paint over it, the water can affect it. So anyway. So that just kind of darkens that up a little bit. And I think I'll hit that with the hairdryer. So I'll go ahead and mute it. Okay, so like I said, I'll come back later and think about thickening the lines. Some of the lines are kind of off and, you know, a little wonky, a little wobbly. I'll come back and I'll make things thicker. I'll probably add some patterns, but it's just kind of one of those things where I like to get it down now and then come back and work on it. So anyway, just kind of think about, I don't know if there's anything else. So I know earlier in the week, somebody had asked about this web pattern that I like to use. I think I'm going to hold off and work with that later. But I think what I want to do is I want to think about, okay, I used this kind of leaf-like pattern here, but that's it. So to kind of make things relate throughout the book, I want to repeat things. So, you know, yeah, I can wrap things around the edge. That's going to kind of lead from one page to another. But if this leaf-like shape is just here, then it's kind of like, oh, okay, it's a leaf-like shape, and it never appears anywhere else. I mean, it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to appear elsewhere. But just kind of thinking like, oh, maybe I can do that. And I'm thinking, you know, I started thinking like, well, you know, I did it with pen. Who says I have to stick with pen? What if I come back and just I'm thinking about the Inktense pencils, but I'm kind of might be interesting here with the brain. Let me go ahead and grab. see, got a nice green here. Let me sharpen it. Okay. So again, just thinking about that shape. It's just a real simple shape. But just like I've done before, I really like shading in around. And it's a leaf-like shape, looks like an eye. I mean, so there's sort of a bit of ambiguity with it. But as soon as I put in some others, then it really starts to read as a leaf. Later on, I might think about if I wanted to add veins and really make it explicitly a leaf. So a key to getting this water-soluble pencil to really spread, like I can get it to spread pretty far, is to really press hard, get a lot of the pigment down, but then I try to shade it out a little bit. I don't. Sometimes I get a little lazy and I don't shade it out as much as I could, but by pressing really hard, I know sometimes folks who are just getting into using the water-soluble pencil, um, they draw very lightly with it and paint over it, and you don't really see much of the pigment spreading. So you really have to press hard and then really shade a lot of it down, color a lot of it down, and it can spread pretty far. I've been using watercolor pencils and the Inktense pencils for the last 20 years, so it comes pretty natural to me to really press as hard as I need to. But I like the effect of going around into the negative space and then painting in around and letting that pigment blend into the background. It was just a technique that I developed years ago when I first started using the water-soluble pencils. And they also make water-soluble graphite, and I haven't used any of that in here, and I don't know if I will. Just that this is a very colorful journal, so maybe I want to keep it that way. But I like that effect with the leaves. I haven't really done that too much. Usually with the leaf shapes, I kind of draw them on afterwards, like with the ink pen. But it really just, you get that sense that they're kind of falling, floating down. Okay, let's hit that with the hair dryer. Yeah, I'm just using the hair dryer because I don't want the color to transfer. It won't take long to dry. Okay. So yeah, I'm liking that. Yeah, it's kind of a nice good start, kind of nice beginnings to this spread. Um, I had an idea. I want to go back and look. So I was thinking about that idea of emergence, and one of the things that I've been playing around with is a notion of like a crack. So I've been doing a lot of paintings with that, um, and so I was just kind of thinking, like, do I want to try to think about that now and incorporate that somewhere? I don't know. Mm. Kind of feel like it could be interesting up here, up front here somewhere. Yeah, why not? Let's go for it. Okay, so I got lots of blues and kind of that fuchsia here. So I'm thinking I want a dark color. I want to go with my, let's go with a indigo. Fine. So indigo is one of my favorite colors, and I use them down to the very, almost to nothing. So this one's almost ready to be replaced, but I'm sure I can get a little bit more out of it. So let me sharpen it. Okay, so yeah, that one's, luckily I do have a brand new one that's ready to go. So yeah, so I'm thinking through here. So if you haven't seen any of those kind of crack paintings that I've been doing, it was something that developed in a free workshop that I did, and it was just all about the artist's voice and trying to play around and experiment, and really grew out of some experimentations. You can kind of catch those there on my Facebook page, or um, the images of the things that I made. So I'm thinking of like a space. So I kind of, the side of the crack is very similar to some of the lines that I've drawn. But then what I try to do is try to shade. So it's really interesting to kind of think about how the shading can create that space. So oftentimes I'm shading into the negative space, and that's given me kind of that window effect. That's what I did here. That's what I did here. And then that's what I did with the leaves, but even like with the circles here. So when I shade around, that kind of creates these like window effects. But what happens is that lighter spot kind of pops out. And then that darker kind of reads, that darker value, that darker red reads as like a shadow. Um, so I can play around with that shadow. And so with the cracks, the idea is that I draw the edge of the crack and then I shade into it. So you could do this and it doesn't have to be a crack. It could just be a straight line. It could be, a profile. But I'm kind of shading into the crack. So I'm not going into the negative space. I'm working into what we call positive space, that crack, because that crack needs to be darker, and it needs to be darker near the edge because it will read as a shadow. Right now, I mean, it reads more kind of as a line. But when I paint it, it's going to start to read more like a crack. So that's the reason I'm doing this journal, is that from this work that I was doing, this notion of emergence came about. And so it just makes sense to like, okay, well, if the cracks led to that notion of emergence, then it seems natural that the crack should be in the journal. And I mean, you can sort of see it. You can kind of see how this crack, these kind of three little legs that kind of come out, they look like they're in, you know, this part and this part and this part look like it pops out. And it's all just because of that little bit of shading. However, if I take my paintbrush, and I have a slightly smaller brush than what I've been using, and go in. So that's a dark, deep indigo, just a real dark blue. And I'm just really trying to keep that hard edge on the side of the crack. For some reason, I just had this weird thought. I was sitting there, you know, saying the word crack. For some reason, it just seems weird to say that. And I was just thinking, you know, release the Kraken. I don't know why. Just the weird stuff that comes up sometimes that you associate with words. And so that Inktense pencil goes right over top of that tracing paper. So there's a strip of tracing paper in there that has some writing on it. So if you tuned in, I forget when that was, probably earlier in the week. Yeah, if you, I know some of you have kind of pretty much tuned in every day, have watched the videos, have seen this evolve. If you haven't tuned in every day and you miss certain days and you have questions about things, I really recommend just going back and watching those other videos, because it'll fill in the gaps. I mean, everything that I do and have done in the journal, I've talked about in those videos. And like I said, they're here on Facebook and they're also on YouTube. So if you can't make it live every day, you can always catch up with the recorded videos. Okay, so yeah, hopefully you can see how that really kind of starts to look like a crack. But what I really love about this and using the Inktense pencils, the water soluble pencils, is that you can still see all the other stuff. So it's like you still see the security envelope in the crack. You can still see the maps. And so you realize like, okay, that's part of this page, but it's been sort of, it looks like it's been pushed down. It looks like that's cracked and has dropped. And I find that a really interesting effect. So, you know, it might be really interesting. I've got, you know, does this continue? And I kind of feel like it should. Kind of wondering if I want to do it on the other side, but it really makes sense that it can continue over here. I just want to make sure. Actually, before I do that, let me dry this page. Okay. So I just feel like I want this to go up and sort of come to an end. And then just do the kind of the same kind of shading. So again, you know, things kind of wrapping around, working through different pages. So like I did with the leaf-like shapes, this is definitely something I'll continue. So like I said, it's kind of based on some of the lines I've already drawn that are kind of uneven, kind of organic. And so kind of continuing some of those lines and some of those shapes and thinking about like, okay, where could that crack come next? Is the idea that the crack is going to kind of work its way through every page? Or is there going to be some kind of thing, or does it pick up? I'm thinking it might pick up here. But that's something to kind of think about. But yeah, I like the fact that I've worked a little bit more back here too. I have a tendency to really focus on the pages at the beginning. And you can see how these are much more developed. I've mentioned that before, but they're really starting to get developed to the point where, you know, they might be feeling like they're getting resolved or completed or finished. But then as you go through, it's like, oh, it's not quite as much, um, but yeah, it's getting there. It's getting there definitely. So, but I think that's going to wrap it up for today. So I appreciate you tuning in again today, day 10. So yeah, so it's been 10 days of working in this little journal. And so if you've missed anything and you want to go back and watch those videos, like I said, I explain everything and sort of how I've built up and what I've done in it. So yeah, feel free, like I said, on Facebook here and also on YouTube. So anyway, yeah, so I'll live stream again on Monday. You know, I take the weekends off. So I won't do anything in this little journal until Monday. I'll be back here again at 3 p.m. But if you have any questions, any comments, again, pop them in the comments and I will be more than happy to try to address them and or answer them. So anyway, thank you so much. I appreciate you being here. Happy Friday. Have a great weekend. And as always, happy creating.